I'm going to make a little analogy here. There's a bridge, right, between where you were and then when we started working together. And that bridge is even in engineering, when you're working on a design of some type, you bring in other folks to look at that design and to, because if you're the expert, sometimes you're too attached to what you're working on, right?
Right
And
on.
so I'm not sure if this is the case, but I'm thinking it's possible that the first time you ever went through like full-fledged collaborative editing was through that first novel process. Is that fair, or had you worked with developers before? And how is that revision process similar and different between the engineering world and the writing world?
It's an interesting kind of analogy that you've put together, George, because it's very true. Often in designing, is you're trying to push the limits, so to speak, and you're constantly. The one that I like to use is the Apple one that I think with Steve Jobs, and that was the point where they switched designers and engineers, and engineers will make sure that what you've designed works, but they're not pushing that envelope because that's not really their role. The designer's role is to push the envelope. And if you didn't have the designer there, we'd still have probably room size computers, right? Like how do I make that room size computer into a telephone book size computer? And that's not the role really of an engineer. That's the one of someone being able to take those things and creatively put them together. When you take writing, it's very, very, very much similar. Is like as if I was to liken it, I think of the writer almost like the designer and the engineer being the editor, and that is trying to bring those two and bring those together. I mean, one of the things that people often ask me is like more and more I hear people not getting editors and just going and literally launching live onto whatever platform they're doing. And I just think like without that editing thing, you miss almost half of what you're trying to create, if that is what your goal is. And so that, to me, that's what's been a big part of my learning, is that it's like that first draft is this is what it's going to look like, and then you start to figure out really what it's all about. And that's the craft. That's like getting like the sculptor getting that piece of clay and starting to wrap starting to take away what they want it to eventually be until it eventually gets to the shape that they're desiring. And to me, that's the process of writing a book. And sometimes it can be very daunting, but to me, it's the exciting part, because it's a big exercise even in yourself, of learning what you're about and where you're going. And certainly since I have been doing this on a full-time basis, that's taken me on a lot of different paths. But but I find that the engineering, I still contend that it's one of the best educations you get, because it does teach you how to think. And one of those things that's very important in writing is being able to take that and bring it all together. And I think engineering really helped me be able to do that. When I look back, I mean, I think of like authors like the late David Foster Wallace, like he was a math guy. You go into Lewis Carroll, a math guy. Like they're just they constantly they keep rising. George Orwell, a math guy. And it's like there is definitely a connection that brings out those two things together and how you can utilize them. And I there's days I wonder whether I could have done this without having had that in my background now.
Well, in fact, the nature of life itself is constant revision. I mean, you yourself said we're revising the technology and we're constantly improving. And I think a lot of amateur writers, are territorial about it. Get off my land kind of approach. I don't want somebody meddling around. But even in like music, when musicians are studying other musicians, they grow from that interaction. They're constantly learning and revising. Even the characters you write in your stories, are starting here and then revising in front of the audience's eyes. That revision is essential for sure. And I just love what you're saying right now.
Well, you mentioned music, and to me, music is one of those things that is very much. It's like, I mean, historically, you've heard like Brian Wilson writing God Only Knows, like in 15 seconds, or Neil Young, Heart of Gold, in a minute and a half. You hear these things. But what you don't hear is what you hear on the radio took 6 months of very talented producers being able to edit and revise what that original concept was for those songs. And even today, it's like the technology is, well, it's so far past what it was, but the amount of work and the effort and the sounds that they're putting together to make that, we have no idea unless you're involved with that industry, what that takes. It's just not sit down, don't touch it, it was perfect the first time I wrote it. Like, no, what we're listening to, be it on streaming or in the radio or whatever format we listen to our music on, believe me, by and large, unless it's live, there's an enormous amount of work behind that production to get it to yourself. And I think, like, to me, that's one of the things that makes it magical, in a sense, right? Because you have the inspiration, you have what that is that you're making, be it a story, be it a song, be it a movie for that matter, and then what really comes out. It's seeing those two things, all those things come together is amazing to me.